Meanwhile, you're listening to some music by Herbie Hancock and Historia, people music. Welcome early arrivers and new bump. Using the Herbie Hancock and Jacko Astorius people music. Welcome all. It's wonderful to see familiar and some new faces. We are again recording, except for the conversations in the breakout rooms. You can find where to watch the recordings at the Eventbrite link you used to register. Please take your cell phone out and have it ready to go to take pictures of the poll results or other slides that especially interest you. Thank you for coming. My name is Phil Coonley, and I'm a member of both 350 Mass Metro North Node and of the Winchester Unitarian Society's Green Sanctuary Committee. We're the groups which developed this seminar. These two organizations were joined in promoting the event by the 8 other organizations listed. The best change organizations are those that are anxious to collaborate in achieving a common goal. Thanks also to the individuals who organized this event. As we're seeing in slide 3, I hope. We're not seeing it in slide 3 yet. Well, I'm not muted, so that's a good sign. Let's see. Hey, John. Okay, good, great. We're not quite there yet, but we're almost. Let me think. Where am I? I have to back up because I can't see my. Okay, great. Yeah, this is good. Now, right, slide 3. Thanks also to the individuals who organized this event and have facilitated its production. Everyone involved has done more than they thought would be needed. And especially thanks to our volunteer, Dave Fonseca, who's making his debut as a Zoom producer today. Our goal is connection rather than protection, rather than perfection. Slide 4. And finally, the entire team offers special appreciation to our 9 fabulous speakers. After today's poll, we'll briefly revisit key takeaways from our first 6 speakers. Our poll is again anonymous, and again, this time it seeks one answer, actually, even though it's a difficult one. It explores your preferences for climate policy. So let's do the poll. We are looking at, well, actually, we're looking at the wrong poll. We want to, it's really nice to know where you're all from, though. But we're really looking for the 6th poll, which will be about policy choices. It's number 6. I think it's number 6. Can't see the listing from where I am. Called Climate Policy Choices. We still have some people from outside New England. That's good. But we don't need this first poll. We're looking for the poll number 6.
Hey, Phil.
Yes.
This is Dave. I don't know. I'm clicking on poll, but that's all I got.
Okay. We'll skip the poll. We'll have it next week.
Whoops, home now. Oh, wait a minute.
Problem.
So no, I just found the drop down.
Okay.
Climate policy preference, this one?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry about that.
Great. Thank you. Now, can people see this? It's a tough poll, and there's only one answer. I mean, you can only pick one answer, but so we're going to take a little bit of time on this. This is more like popcorn than usual. What?
Why not showing 2 more questions with no choice, like no choice 1 or choice 2?
What's happening? 1 second. My wife, who's on a different computer, points out that at the bottom of this poll, you'll see some other questions that aren't filled out. And that has to do with my inability to clean up this poll entry somehow when I was doing it. I knew they were there, so ignore those. It's only those first 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. This is more like real popcorn popping. You know, it takes about 2 minutes or 3 minutes before anything happens. because there's quite a bit to think about here. Okay. Well, only about a third of you have participated so far. Oh, now it's picking up again. Okay, we're going to give about 25 more seconds and then we'll review the results. It's beginning to slow down again. Okay, I'm going to end the poll and share the results. Wow, my favorite one only got one vote. Let's see. Pretty interesting. We're all over the place. Take a picture of that, everybody. This doesn't always get captured by our recording. Okay, stop sharing that and I'm gonna go. Everybody saw the results, right? I hope. Good, now I have to make this small. As always, slide 5, the program has 3 goals: to provide realistic hope and vision for solving the climate problem. 2, to find some impactful actions we can take at the state and local level. And 3, the identification of resources and connections for taking those actions. Let's look back at highlights from our first 4 sessions. The drawdown videos have given us the global facts, clarity about the damage to people and other creatures already caused and still accelerating, and the identification of benign solutions already proven to be practical which if all implemented in an accelerated manner could reverse climate change and create a better life for all. Our speakers are focused on the opportunities to play our part in the acceleration of benign solutions. Mark Sandine, slide 6, a Lexington Select Board member, told us to join a group to electrify everything. Join a group, electrify everything, and to know that together we can solve the challenges. Lexington's progress on climate is inspirational. Ken Pruitt, Winchester's Director of Sustainability, also spoke to how important it is for households to sign up for 100% renewable electricity and to develop a plan for transitioning your home and transport to all electric. And he also said, if your community is just beginning to move on climate-friendly change, help ensure it starts off with a project that has obvious short and long-term benefits. Nothing helps like success, early success. Cora Weisberg of Mothers Out Front informed us about the safety, dangers, and environmental damage from natural gas use in our homes and how important it is to make our homes electric and our state's electricity supply 100% fossil fuel free. She's also reminded us that 1/3 of Massachusetts survey respondents think natural gas, is a clean and renewable fuel, but they're dead wrong. This means we need subsidies for retrofits to existing homes and apartments in building codes allowing no fossil fuel dependency on our new construction. Cora also shared a Venn diagram from the podcast, How to Save the Planet, that addressed a question that has frequently shown up in our chat. How should I decide how to help? The diagram suggests the answer for each of us lies in the intersection between what brings us joy, what we are good at, and what needs to be done. This is wonderful advice. I must confess, though, that in climate work, I and many of my colleagues often give precedence to our sense of what needs to be done. Alan Field of 350 Mass and other environmental groups spoke about the importance of state policy, especially when there is individual gridlock. Fossil fuel vested interests have vastly outspent us in lobbying, but we have the informed voters and have flooded representatives with letters and visits with superior reasons and passion for changing the status quo. Thus, we have passed game-changing climate legislation in Massachusetts. Once passed, though, voter focus needs not to fade, but rather to shift on ensuring aggressive implementation. Otherwise, there is way too much room for mischief by lobbyists and a devastating delay. Ingrid Geis, also from 350 Mass, told us to follow the money, including any pension fund you are tied to, in the bank you use. Otherwise, our funds may be going to fund new fossil fuel production. Around here, your local bank is less likely to be funding fossil fuel production, but still have a talk with them about your hopes for a fossil fuel-free future. Aligning our savings and investment behavior with our values is as important as aligning our consumer behavior and values. Slide 12, Roger Rosen, our third speaker from 350 Mass, spoke of direct or disruptive action in building courage, movement followers, and solidarity, gathering, standing, marching, singing, creating signs, holding signs, street theater, and sometimes civil disobedience or hunger strikes can be very effective. The media notices new followers and allies emerge, and decision makers can be influenced to reverse bad decisions and or initiate overdue constructive actions. About noon today, I texted Roger for an update on the hunger strike he is midst. Here is his response. We're all doing well. It's been a great success so far. Lots of media attention, which gives us the opportunity to talk about the Peabody peaker plant and how wrong it is. We're doing a standout today in Holden from 2:30 to 3:30 p.m. and a big rally in Peabody at Courthouse Square on Tuesday from 4:30 to 6. Let me repeat that. A big rally in Peabody at Courthouse Square on Tuesday from 4:30 to 6. I'm sure a lot of you, along as I was, were relieved to know that they're all doing well. Some of them aren't spring chickens. Of course, each of these first 6 speakers, Mark, Ken, Cora, Alan, Ingrid, and Roger, said so much more. So revisit the recordings. Again, the link is at the Eventbrite registration page and also in most of the weekly reminders emails that I've sent out. Now let's go to today's agenda. Coming up is our 5th video from Drawdown's Climate Solutions 101 series, Putting It All Together. We'll then all meet in small breakout rooms to share our thoughts. After a brief report from each group via chat, we'll have the pleasure of listening to today's speaker, John Walkey from GreenRoots. After Q&As, we'll wrap up by 5:30 p.m. with a preview of next week's program and a request for some feedback from you. The Zoom site will stay open for another 15 minutes for a short music video and for those wanting to ask for or give information. Okay, now the screening of the 10-minute video, Putting It All Together.
All right, so now we're going to put it all together and take the climate solutions we've talked about and see what we can do to stop climate change when we put them all together. But remember, we started with these 3 principles. Start by reducing the sources right from the emissions, and we're going to take those to 0. Then we work with nature to support the carbon sinks that naturally remove CO2 out of the atmosphere on land and in the oceans, and maybe even augment them with agriculture, new trees, and maybe even machines. And finally, we're going to look at ways that by improving society, we might introduce new climate solutions while also improving human well-being. When we put them all together and we see kind of the big picture of solutions, we see that a lot of these coming together give us a very powerful toolbox. For example, starting by reducing sources across those big 5 areas of electricity and food, industry, transportation, and buildings, we have a whole suite of solutions right there in all those different circles. Then we go down to supporting sinks, and we can see that we have a lot of solutions already in the land area and some very promising ones beginning to emerge in oceans and with engineered solutions as well. And finally, we can see by improving society, especially access to healthcare and education, we actually introduce kind of a secondary set of climate solutions that play a really big role as well. And it's kind of amazing. No one of these solutions is big enough to do the whole job. They're kind of equally spaced around sources and different sectors and between sources and sinks and society. But if we pull them together, we can maybe change the future. So let's take a look. We took all of the kind of solutions we estimated before, where we crunched the numbers to see how big they could be, and we ran them through a computer model of the Earth's atmosphere and our climate to see what might happen. Well, here's what we found. If we look at the atmosphere and its concentration of greenhouse gases, the red curve kind of shows, you might call it business as usual. We start in 2020 with where we are now, basically, and run forward with our best guesses about the future use of energy, land, and materials. But then we introduced the drawdown solutions in the yellow curve, and we did an even more aggressive scenario in the green curve. These 2 scenarios say we're going to tackle climate change either aggressively in yellow or really aggressively in green. And when we do this, guess what we find? It turns out that by deploying solutions we already have in place and just getting going with them, we can stop climate change and reach that moment of drawdown as early as the 2040s and maybe through the 2050s to 2060s. All of those possibilities between the yellow and the green are entirely possible. And remember, these are solutions that already exist and already work. There's nothing new here, we just have to deploy them. So what would that do to our climate? Well, again, that red curve, that kind of business as usual, just keeps warming. And it's going to head to warming of about 2.5 degrees here, and it probably heads towards 3 and beyond. That's like a whole other planet. We don't want to go there. The yellow curve and the green curve, though, we find actually stabilize our temperatures between 1.5 degrees warmer and 2 degrees warmer. That's, again, right now we're at 1 degree warmer than normal. We could stop it at about 1.5 to 2 degrees. And that's when we start slamming the brakes on climate change. And those targets basically correspond to what we call the Paris Accords. This was an international agreement which would say, let's limit climate change to no more than 1.5 to 2 degrees. And we find we could actually pull it off. But that's looking at the big picture. In reality, we've got to look at the specific solutions and kind of drill down into each of them. In our original book back in 2017, we ran some numbers and presented kind of a ranked list of solutions. It looked a little bit like this, where we said at the top there are some solutions. In this case, we have wind turbines, solar panels, food waste, changing our diets, and so on. And we ranked them from like 1 through 80 and kept going and going. That's great, and people love rankings for some reason. It's kind of clickbait. People want to compare their favorite solution to your favorite solution and all that. That's cool. But what we learned is we also have to deploy all of them. So to me, it doesn't quite matter what the rankings are. Is number 23 really that different than number 25, since we have to do them anyway? So basically, let's do all the solutions and look at them in context. So we're going to look at them like this. It turns out that we can look at solutions whether they're from the sources, the sinks, or society all at once. And we can look at all the multiple sectors of the economy and of nature and see how they all play out. Then we can look at what we call solution clusters, like things that are about energy efficiency, promoting renewables, protecting ecosystems, kind of big groupings of solutions. And then we can drill down to the specifics of which solution exactly where and how big they could be, one by one, and so on. And we can walk through all these different sectors of electricity, food, industry, transport, and we can see land sinks. We can see how health and education plays a role. And we put it all together. We have kind of the master slide. This is the roadmap for how we can stop climate change, all in one picture. So these are the solutions. These are the things, if we put them out and put them to scale, could actually stop climate change. And every single one of these exists. In the future, we can add more of them as we learn more and develop new technologies, but there's nothing that should stop us starting today. But inevitably people will say, well, this will cost too much. It doesn't take, we don't have enough money. It'll cost too much to society. Let me show you that's completely not true. It's just utter nonsense. It's actually a lie. It turns out that yes, initially we do have to put some money on the table to implement climate solutions. Of course we do. In this scenario, we put in about $25 to $30 trillion at first. This graph I'm showing you is what we call a cost curve. Economists use it to kind of look at things we should do and how much they cost. On the horizontal axis, going left to right, we have all the climate solutions in order in terms of their cost, from cheapest to most expensive, all stacked together. The vertical is what each one of them costs, going up and down. Well, we see some of these things actually save you money on day one, like energy efficiency. Other solutions to the right cost some money up front. But if we run the clock forward about 20 to 30 years or so, and we incorporate these savings that these climate solutions generate, or new kinds of revenue, we find that almost all of them save enormous amounts of money, far more than they cost originally. In fact, if we, in this scenario, spend about $28 trillion, which is a lot of money, but it's a lot less than we use to subsidize fossil fuels and our world's militaries and other things, we actually make back about $145 trillion, which oil and the military and other things couldn't possibly do. So this is about a 5-to-1 return on investment, and there's really no downside at all. And this doesn't even count the cost of avoiding dangerous climate change. If the world got 2, 3, 4 degrees warmer than normal, it would be catastrophic and cost untold trillions of dollars and affect hundreds and hundreds of millions of lives in incredibly bad ways. So this is the biggest bargain in history. I think of it as the largest economic and job creation opportunity we've ever seen. So when people tell you, oh, it's not economical to tackle climate change, it's, first of all, a lie. What they're really saying is, this is actually kind of inconvenient for very powerful special interests right now, so please don't talk about it. So what have we learned? We've learned that, yes, we actually have today enough solutions to stop climate change. They are big enough. In fact, when we put about 80 of them together, and we're adding more all the time, we have enough solutions in our back pocket to stop climate change. And together, these solutions would make the world better, healthier, more prosperous, more resilient, and more secure than we've ever been. And we can prevent huge damages to the future and leave a beautiful living planet for future generations.
When I was telling our Zoom producer about Drawdown, he really said to me, wow, I didn't realize there was any hope. And of course, there is a lot of hope. So anyway, we all take something different away from what we've just seen. So we're going to get in the breakout room. And when we do there, we'll follow the same guidelines we always follow. We'll be sure everyone has an opportunity to talk and be heard. We'll try both and thinking. More than one reality or perspective can be true at the same time. And 3, we'll know what others have said and build upon each other's ideas. Once all, usually 4 of us are in the breakout room, please first each introduce yourself to the group and include why you're here today. Then discuss the question, what stood out for you most in the video? After return, please send to every can you feature the chat rather than the John Walkey slide? Dave? Sometimes the chat can be featured. So it's pretty obvious to everybody. There we go. There we go. Great. Oh, by the way, I'm an economist by training, so when they talk about trillions, that loses a lot of us. But it's interesting that we spend about $6 trillion a year reinvesting in fossil fuel dependent equipment. So that, I mean, there's real money just in perpetuating what we're doing. So it's not like it has to come out of nowhere. It just changes from your gasoline powered electric vehicle to your electric powered electric vehicle, a vehicle. I mean, that's part of the economics here. It's not all new money, it's just reallocating money you were going to spend anyway. Let's see what some of these thoughts are. I'm hoping you're reading the chat because you can read a lot faster than I can talk. And there's a lot of different great ideas in here. And the chat does get captured in our recordings, I think, somehow. So I'm going to introduce our speaker. And thanks for sharing your thoughts here. It's now my honor to introduce today's guest speaker, John Walkey. Director of Waterfront and Climate Justice Initiatives at GreenRoots. He's an East Boston resident who has been committed to the work of the Chelsea Creek Action Group, a Cross Creek coalition of Chelsea and East Boston residents for the past 15 years, as well as the movement for the environmental, climate, and transportation justice. John's knowledge, relationships, and understanding of community organizing, project implementation, and strategic planning are helping advance, strengthen, and grow GreenRoots work. His technical capacity in GIS, database development, and web-based technologies complement his program management, his competence. He's going to discuss today the disproportionate effects of climate change on Chelsea and other Boston area communities. During his talk, please send me any questions you have for him. We'll save some time for Q&As afterwards. Let's go. Here's John.
Phil, I don't have a way of making John co-host. Hey, Phil. Could you make John co-host? Hey, Phil. I'm not hearing him. Where'd Phil go? Ah, there we go. Sorry, John. I think you're now co-host.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for having me here. Hopefully you're seeing a startup slide. My name is John Walkey. I am the Director of Waterfront and Climate Justice Initiatives at GreenRoots. And we're going to talk a little bit, as the introduction said, about our environmental justice work and talk about some things that folks can do to help support some of that work in Chelsea and East Boston. So I'm going to actually start a timer as well so I can keep track and make sure I don't go too long here. So the GreenRoots is an organization. We've actually been around since 1994. So we're coming up on 30 years of being around. And we started out sort of as a traditional Friends of group. Our original name was the Green Space and Recreation Committee of the Chelsea Human Services Collaborative. And about 6 years ago, we spun off from what is now called the Collaborativa in Chelsea. And we branded ourselves as GreenRoots and continued on with many of the same projects that we've been doing over the past 25, 28 years or so. We've really next slide. To give you a little background of the area that we're working in, as I said, we started out just mainly in Chelsea. And so Chelsea and East Boston are places that you might drive over on the Tobin Bridge or drive through to get to the airport. But if you come out and check out the neighborhood, you'll see that Chelsea is really a small city, one of the smallest cities in Massachusetts, but one of the most densely packed ones, because a good chunk of that 2 square miles that we take up is covered in industrial infrastructure. So folks are squeezed in on what remains for residential properties. And some of these statistics you see on the slide actually need to be updated with the new census data, but we're somewhere around a little over 50,000 residents squeezed into that 2 square miles, about 3/4 identifying as ethnic minorities. And in Chelsea, that's really diverse. It's Puerto Rican to Central American, African American to recent arrivals from Somalia and from all over. It's a real international kind of town. And about a quarter of the population living below the poverty line. And if we go across the Chelsea Creek, and you can see in the middle of the screen there, that's the marine estuary of the Chelsea Creek that sort of brings the two communities together. And over in East Boston, where I live, you've got the entire landmass being about 5 square miles. But if you just remove the airport, we're talking about 2 square miles or so that people are living in. So very similar to Chelsea, about probably closer to 64,000 residents. And we are still, it says 53% Latino. We're actually a little over 50%. So we're still the only majority Latino neighborhood in Boston. A lot of either Colombian or Salvadoran immigrants make up that population. And about 17%, probably a little lower now, living below the poverty line, because as you know, or may be aware, East Boston has suddenly become a hot real estate market. So there are a lot of new folks who've moved in with money, and a lot of the working class folks are being squeezed out of the neighborhood and through displacement. But these statistics roughly give you an idea of the folks that we work with. And this is a sort of unifying graphic of how GreenRoots approaches our work. And that megaphone in the middle there, that's GreenRoots. We serve as sort of a mouthpiece for the community's concerns. And the concerns of the community really drive what we do, where it drives our mission. And they fall into a number of different areas. I mean, we started out advocating for more green space and park space. We've done community gardens, which now we have an urban farm, and we're opening up this year. We'll be constructing a teaching kitchen to deal with nutrition issues. And that all falls under the food justice banner. We've had a long-running youth program, so doing youth development and providing a space for youth voices to be heard. We've a long-running effort of ours is getting waterfront access. Even though we are a coastal community, we've been shut off from the waterfront in Chelsea, especially by all the industrial uses. Improving transit bus service in Chelsea and East Boston as communities that are very transit dependent. It's important. We have very high levels of asthma. Childhood hospitalization rates for asthma are very high in Chelsea, and all that's directly related to the industrial impacts on our air quality. So for a long time, we've done a lot of air quality monitoring and such. And obviously now, as all environmental groups are working on, is climate. And for us, that means climate justice. It means the disparate kinds of impacts that climate change has on low-income communities and communities of color. And directly related to that, energy, which is a new area for us, energy democracy, and I'm going to talk a bit more about that. But the idea of GreenRoots is that we help to engage the community on these concerns, empower them and educate them on how they can make a difference in implementing really innovative solutions. So the real crux of our work is all about the unequal distribution of environmental burdens and the public health impacts coming from those. And this picture I particularly like to present just because this is over on Route 1A in Revere, looking across Chelsea, and these tanks in the foreground. This is the Chelsea Creek down here on the bottom of the screen. The tanks in the foreground are Gulf oil, so this is all gasoline for mostly car use. You've got the community squeezed in, and those smokestacks in the distance there, that's the Mystic Generating Station over on the Everett side of Chelsea. So you do get the sense that Chelsea is hemmed in on all sides by industry and all the impacts that come with that. So we'll do a quick little tour here. This is a compare and contrast tour. So we have this marine estuary, which should be an asset, but here we see from the East Boston side in the foreground, there's some salvage scrapping work going on. And in the background, you see the Eastern Minerals salt pile in Chelsea. And here we see the nearby Charles River, not a mile away, where we've got another kind of land use going on in Cambridge and Back Bay. Over here, the land use is home heating oil in those tanks in Chelsea. And over here, we have a different view of another, what at one time was a tidal river along the Charles River. The land use over on Chelsea again, and what happens over going up the Charles River and the Muddy River. So the real question that we have is why are we stuck with the oil terminals? Why are we stuck with all of these different uses? And in truth, these are all necessary things for our economy to function for so many years. We have, for instance, the salt piles at Eastern Minerals. They have a facility also up in Portsmouth, and between Chelsea and Portsmouth, they provide road salt for basically all of Massachusetts and much of New England. They really have the market cornered. The New England Produce Center on the Everett-Chelsea border is the largest independent produce distribution center on the East Coast. They provide fruits and vegetables from the maritime provinces all the way down the mid-Atlantic states. And almost all of it is coming in and going out by diesel-fueled tractor trailer trucks. So that's a massive impact in the community. And of course, we have Logan International Airport in East Boston. And in addition to the air traffic, which brings noise and pollution, we also have all the concomitant ground traffic that goes along with that, and all the supporting uses, freight forwarding and things like that in the neighborhood. And relative to fuel, 100% of the jet fuel for Logan Airport is stored on Chelsea Creek in East Boston. 70% of the gasoline used around Massachusetts comes up Chelsea Creek. And 80% of the home heating oil used in the region is stored on Chelsea Creek. So energy really does have a very big footprint in our communities in terms of the burdens. And then we have things like this as well, which is not, you might not consider a burden right off the bat, but right over the border in Everett, we have the new casino. So that's bringing in benefits for the region as the tax revenue goes out to all of Massachusetts. However, the traffic and the kind of social ills that come with a casino are concentrated in our communities as opposed to being further out on 128 somewhere. So these are some of the different disproportionate burdens that are borne by these neighborhoods. And now to give you an idea of how GreenRoots manages these kinds of campaigns, I just want to briefly touch on one that was a few years ago. When a man named Jim Gordon came to town and wanted to put in a diesel burning peaker plant, basically like what they're proposing for Peabody. They wanted to put in Chelsea. So this would be a fast start plant that would be used when, during the summer months when there was a need for energy. But they proposed it on a piece of land on Chelsea Creek that was directly across the street from the one and only elementary school complex in Chelsea. So all the kids would be in this playground right across the street from a diesel burning power plant that was right on the banks of the Chelsea Creek. The thing that was the kicker on this campaign was the fact that Jim Gordon was also the man, you might remember his name, he was the guy who proposed Cape Wind down on the Cape. So he was getting feted by many of the environmental sector because he was introducing offshore wind to Massachusetts. He was a pioneer on this, on greening our future. And he used that image to the hilt when he was fighting folks down on the Cape who didn't want their view spoiled by wind turbines off on the horizon. But at the same time that he was peddling clean energy for the Cape, he was also putting in dirty energy for a community of color in Chelsea. So our campaigns, typically, we have a legal side where we work, in this case, the state laws pertaining to the coastal zone, Chapter 91 it's called. We did a lot of work in appealing their Chapter 91 license. And at the same time, we also did a lot of exactly what I think your previous speaker from 350 had been mentioning about doing civil disobedience, of getting public actions. We had banner drops. We disrupted one of his Jim Gordon's presentations where he was presenting his clean energy solutions. And we made sure people in the audience knew he also had dirty energy solutions as well. And in the end, we did succeed in preventing that project. And now what's going in that parcel of land is actually going to be not the best thing in the world. It's going to be a large warehouse for freight distribution. However, we did manage to get a commitment out of them for a public park along the waterfront, public access all along the entire waterfront of their property, with an investment on the management and maintenance of that waterfront park walkway, as well as getting them to commit to having some solar power on their facilities and making their building energy efficient. And So we're able to work with people as well as to fight them. We have two modes, you know, it's a John Deere thing. There's rabbit and turtle. We've got fighting them and working with them. You know, there are two ways to go about making it work. And here's one where we're in that John Deere mode is in rabbit. We're in fight mode right now with Eversource. And I want to present pretty quickly here the campaign. This is sort of floating over the Chelsea Creek down below here. And we're looking into East Boston. This is the Eagle Hill neighborhood. Route 1A running towards the top of this image, and the airport just being at the very top. And down here is where Eversource would like to put in a high voltage electrical substation. At high tide, the water comes right up along this tree line along here. And you can see a very, this is playground, the American Legion playground is a heavily used playground. We don't have that much green space in East Boston, so this soccer field here gets a lot of use. We do have an urban wild that back in about 2004, 2005, we worked with a number of advocates to get this bit, this was the first bit of public access to the Chelsea Creek that was established by community activists. And I was involved at the tail end of that project, which was a great project. And here, going about just about 100 meters, about 300 feet to the east here, is an 8 million gallon tank of jet fuel for Logan Airport. So you've got a substation on the banks of the creek, and you've got jet fuel. So we have an igniter and we have a fuel source. And that's been kind of a concern for us, as this area right in here, this is Condor Street. This road, in the winter storms of 2018, this road was closed off because it was knee deep in salt water. The ocean came up and flooded this whole area. And what we know is going forward by 2040, 2050, certainly by 2070, this area is going to see flooding on a regular basis. And not just from storm surge and sea level rise, but even last summer when we've had these heavy downpours that are occurring and are increasingly occurring because of climate change, we saw this road closed once again. I had to help someone push their car out of the water down here because the stormwater system cannot manage the amount of rain that we're getting these days. And so this area is in a low spot that floods. And that's precisely where they want to put this substation. Not a good land use plan. So if we take a look at the whole project, ISO New England, the entity that runs our grid, originally had requested a redundant transmission line to run from that Mystic generating station that's over in Everett. And they've already built this now. This thing has been going on for about almost 10 years. And they did manage to get their transmission line built to an existing substation in Chelsea in an industrial area. But Eversource stuck in on the basis of their own needs assessment, a substation over here in East Boston. And we questioned a bit of this project. One, it comes in an underground conduit underneath the creek, and it comes up on this site here. 215,000 volt cables running over to step down the transmission grade, the high voltage electricity down to distribution grade, which will go under the streets to people's houses. Our concerns, basically, as I've mentioned, are the flooding, which could either be from extreme rain events or from sea level rise and storm surge. And then equipment failures. So as we saw in Hurricane Sandy in Manhattan, when a substation floods, it has a tendency to explode. And also in just in past winter storms, we've had a substation over in Andrew Square in South Boston. Just during an ice storm, the equipment ended up arcing, shooting up some sparks, causing a momentary brownout, blackout in that neighborhood. However, having that be so close to a playground where there are kids playing, and having it so close to so much jet fuel in a densely packed neighborhood just makes us a little nervous. Also, this piece of land you see here where it's going in, for many years, the city's open space plans had this slated to become a passive park, more recreation, green space, which makes a lot of sense to have as a buffer on the waterfront. However, that's been taken away now just for more industrial infrastructure in a neighborhood that already bears quite a lot of it. There were some concerns around electromagnetic radiation, but as we looked into it, you would really have to be living right on top of the transformer to be affected by it. So that's actually a little bit less of a legitimate concern, although EMRs are something to keep in mind. But then finally, even if you never step foot in East Boston again in your life, you will be affected by this substation, because this $60 million investment is 100% paid for by you and me on our electric bills. And within that price, that $60 million price tag, there is an 11 to 12 or 12 to 14% guaranteed profit margin, guaranteed to the Eversource company. So we are paying for this. If it's needed, if it's not needed, if it needs to be rebuilt because it gets flooded, we will pay for it to be rebuilt. And that is a concern of ours. And there's a concern as to how this process rolls out, as to who makes this decision and where is the transparency on the data that says this is needed and this is the location where it is needed. A lot of that data is proprietary data of Eversource. So basically they told us, trust us, you need this $60 million investment that you're going to pay for. And we said, we'd like to see the data, please. And they said, no, I'm sorry, we can't show you the data, but trust us, you need it. And we need that 12 to 14% profit margin as well, I'm sure. So there's a number of concerns here. This just shows you a little bit of some flood modeling using the city's data on climate vulnerability assessment. And you can see the flood pathway is actually coming from further down on the creek, comes down Condor Street and floods this low spot down here. So there's, we've looked at the data and we do not see it as being a wise investment. Relative to the process of how these things work, I just want to do this quickly. I won't go into all the details, but basically, I mentioned before in our campaigns, we deal with a lot of the legal side of things, and we've had some pro bono lawyers working with us. The Energy Facilities Siting Board, the EFSB, is the state entity that signs off on all these projects. So there's a permit there that they've received, but that they had to go and get. There's the Boston Conservation Commission, which they had to go get a permit, an order of conditions, it's called, so that they can go to the Mass Department of Environmental Protection and get that Chapter 91 license. I mentioned that's the law that pertains to anything on the waterfront. There's also some low-level permits that are needed from other city agencies. And what we've done is we are appealing their EFSB decision, and that appeal goes to the Supreme Judicial Court of Massachusetts. And so we're in the process of doing that. That will be filing some of our statements in the coming months. And it's been a long time coming. It's been about 2 years since we filed to do this, and our oral arguments will start up in September. So that's something to be on the lookout for. But we're appealing that EFSB decision. We appealed the Conservation Commission decision, and that ended up being appealed to 2 different locations. You appeal CONCOM decisions to the DEP, and you can appeal them to Suffolk Superior Court. I'm going to wrap up here. We also appealed their Chapter 91 permit. So we are very appealing people. We appeal anything that'll move, and that's what we're trying to do at the moment. So finally, just to wrap up on what you can do to help, I've got a few different things. Some are directly related, some of them are tangentially related. But one of the first ones we said, even if we aren't able to stop this thing, we certainly want to change this process. So there is a piece of legislation that is currently at the State House. It's actually stuck in the Telecom, Utilities and Energy, or the TUE committee. And this is an Energy Facilities Siting Board reform bill that basically makes it so that they have to consider climate and they have to consider community when they do these things, as opposed to just considering cost and what's the cheapest and least damaging option is what they go by now. There's also a Fix the Grid campaign going on. So a lot of this comes back to ISO New England and how they make decisions on how our electrical grid runs. And I would say that one of the important things, if you haven't heard about MOPR, you should know about MOPR. It's the minimum offer price rule. And right now that's the policy that is allowing fossil fuel generating stations to have a little bit more of a lifeline in Massachusetts when we want to close those things down. And then finally, and specifically for our campaign, our Secretary of Energy and Environmental Affairs Katie Theoharides, or Climate Katie as she's known, we need to tell her not to grant a certificate of public interest. That's something that Eversource is filing right now that would throw all of the appeals out the window and allow them it's a trump card basically for them to just run forward with their project. And I will send, and with that, I'm going to end the presentation so we can have some discussion, but I will send around to folks that can be distributed afterwards some of the contact information and a little bit more information on these three things. So you'll have some background on that as well. And I will stop sharing so we can see each other. There we go.
Wow, that's terrific. We've got several questions. We start with the same one each time, which is what got you so involved and what keep you going when it comes to climate justice work?
Well, I live in East Boston, so I wisely bought on the top of the hill, but everything else around me is going to be getting flooded. I think folks know a lot of the history of Boston, the filling of the Back Bay, but so much of Boston is landfill. And it's kind of one of those last filled, first flooded kind of deals. If you look to the past, you'll see what our future is. So a whole lot of Boston is going to be underwater. So responding to climate change is really a self-interest. I want to make sure that Boston is around to see tomorrow and that we're not losing neighborhoods due to the flooding.
By the way, the group here today heard a lot about ISONE, and many of the people I'm looking at were at in front of the State House on it was Wednesday afternoon with GreenRoots and others, making sure the world knows a little more about this ISONE and how they by determining who gets to respond to bids when it comes to new energy sources, electricity sources in New England, how much power they have so that they can't get away with what they're doing now. So thanks for bringing it back up again. Some of the questions had to do with what you're doing on the East Boston's substation. You really addressed that. What are some of the organizations you work with? Because that's one of our themes. Is it's really good to cooperate when it comes to common goals. Could you mention more about that?
Sure. We're a member of what's called the EJ table. So that's a group of environmental justice organizations that worked pretty hard on putting environmental justice language into the climate bill, the roadmap bill that passed just a little over now, maybe a week or so, over a year ago. We just passed the anniversary of that climate bill passing. So that includes groups like the Conservation Law Foundation, Neighbor to Neighbor, Alternatives for Community and Environment, or ACE, that's over in Roxbury, Coalition for Social Justice down in the south, down like around New Bedford area. And there's we also, all the groups that were out there at the rally on Wednesday. So Community Action Works, Mothers Out Front, 350, so many different groups that are involved. The climate movement is sort of one whole section. The environmental justice groups are another one. But then for East Boston, a lot of our real grassroots work for the community we work with, their biggest concern when you're dealing, especially with immigrants who are able to sort of, they just went through a whole lot to get to this country. Picking up and moving from East Boston to another neighborhood is not that big a deal for them. Getting them engaged, really, we end up working with a lot of housing organizations as well. City Life Vida Urbana is a group in the greater Boston area that looks at housing displacement. So we're looking at ways that we can make more green buildings, like electrify. I think that were some of the messages you've heard is how do we electrify our buildings? A lot of the people we work with get nervous when we say that, because in order to electrify and weatherize and solarize your house, that's a huge investment and you want a return on that investment. And as soon as you make a better house, you suddenly raise the rents and folks are forced to leave the region because they can't afford to live here anymore. So we're trying to figure out how do we green things without whitening them is the blunt way to put it. How do we green things up so that we don't end up pushing out all the communities of color and low income folks who are in a given neighborhood? How can immigrants actually participate in the green economy and be a part of this and not just be a victim to it?
Thank you. By the way, there's still plenty of room in the chat for questions. Just send them to me and I'll make sure they get to John. Another question we have here is, well, you've spoken to it, but maybe you can give us a little more. You said we can help you by energized and being energized. I know 350 Mass is focused on this House 3336, the act to restore relative to energy facility siting reform. Is there anything else besides lobbying that can be helpful to you?
I think the lobbying is a big one, and I think the good thing is that I mean, that's a bill that's really important. It'll be great if we can get that out of the House. I think Senator Barrett, who is a great ally in terms of a lot of green and sort of green economy things, I think he's got some concerns, and we're trying to address those. But the climate bill that everyone worked so hard to get passed last year, it's sort of like you get it passed. It's like giving birth, but now we have to raise that child. You know, that bill has passed, but we now need to make sure it gets through the pipeline. Every one of the state agencies is supposed to go through and put out what their policy is. We're supposed to have that embedded in all the different procedures that are happening. And it's slowly happening, and I think people will get around to it, but it's bureaucracy. It doesn't move that fast. And the best way to get it going is really to give them the real push, to give them a phone call and say, you know, this isn't about legislation, this isn't about a specific project, but I worked very hard on getting a bill passed. I'd like to know what you guys are doing to make sure that you're going to implement it now. And that's something your legislators can help with, but then reaching out to the DEP or any of the Department of Public Utilities and saying, listen, you're supposed to look at disparate impacts on environmental justice communities. You know, you're supposed to look at climate when you consider this permit for a new project. Making sure you hold their feet to the fire that we passed something, the people have spoken, and you guys need to respond.
I don't know if I'm the most naive person listening to you, but I had no idea about the citing of so many environmental problems in your community is just incredible. And the way you capture those photos, capture the way you're sandwiched between one threat and another threat, and in the air quality, let alone the noise and the potential for huge accidents. It's really frightening. Thank you for waking me up, at least. And are there some other questions? By the way, the point you made about follow-up, once a bill is passed, it's not over. That was when Alan Field was making. 350 Mass has committees that are focused just on being watchdogs, because they're moving slowly in many ways. It's not just the ISO that's kind of slowing things down. Things being slowed down all over the place. And some of that has to do with who's governor. That makes a difference too, because a lot of these laws basically put the enforcement responsibility with the governor and the bureaucracy that reports to him or her. Are there some other questions here? I'm not seeing a lot. You have some questions for us.
One thing that a lesson learned that has come out from all of this, and it's not completely being kind of a cynic. It wasn't a total surprise. However, I did put up like when the FBI does those things where they have all the family tree of criminals and they make the lines and they make all the connections. And we started doing that with the regulators and the regulated, and it got kind of frightening as we went along. One of the first things was when this project is so old, it actually started under the Menino administration. And at the time, the chief of energy and environment, who helped sort of gestate this project, it was facilitated by an actual illegal land swap. The purchase and sale on the land between the city and Eversource was actually signed before their RFP went out that's saying this piece of property is available. So totally illegal, but by the time that has been revealed, everyone's either dead or out of office, so nobody cares anymore. But the person who was the chief of energy and environment After he left, when Menino left office, he went on to become the vice president of governmental affairs for Eversource. And we then, the Chapter 91 license, which is a very important piece of a permit that this project needed, the head of the DEP's Waterways Division that reviews those licenses had to recuse himself because before he became the head of that department, he actually wrote the permit application for Eversource because he worked for the consulting firm that was doing those. And obviously, I think most folks are aware of the Weymouth compressor station, and that our former secretary, Matthew Beaton of Energy and Environmental Affairs, after he okayed that over the screams of people from Weymouth, he okayed that project. He then went to go work for one of the consulting firms that works for the Enbridge company. Our current secretary, Katie Theoharides, her husband is a vice president of National Grid, and she is, directly, it just became this feeling that there wasn't a revolving door between the industry and government. It was more of an open office concept, and they just sort of walked back and forth from one side to the other. And it's understandable because the energy sector, as I've come to learn, is tremendously technical and very complicated. And for the people who understand it, if you're going to regulate it, you need to understand it. And the best way to understand it is to have come from working there. So, but there just seems to be a lack of transparency on some of the decision making and what are the priorities that guide that decision making. And I think a lot of what we're talking about with ISO New England, with the Energy Facility Siting Board, with the Department of Public Utilities, is really being much more transparent on how you present this to the public so that we have a clear understanding that if something is needed, and then if it is needed and it is a burden on a community, then we can have a conversation about where it should go, which communities are already overburdened. So can we share the load with other people? And I think right now the system we have in place is so opaque, it's very hard to know if something is needed, first off. And then if it is, the decision-making process by which it gets placed in a community is basically one that is not a fair one. It's not an equitable one. And so that's really what we're pushing on.
Thanks. And I'm not surprised about the revolving door there. What's the source of GreenRoots funding?
Principally, we're coming from a lot of charitable foundations more than anything else. Definitely during COVID, Chelsea was very hard hit, and we shift gears, and a lot of our work was delivering food and doing vaccine drives and testing drives and things like that, and really helping folks out at a very existential level. And there was a lot of money coming in from state and federal government. And we occasionally get grants from the EPA and other institutions from the government, but most of our money is coming in from private donors and charitable foundations.
Thank you. Another question related to the legislation. If everything was followed in the roadmap bill, the climate bills that were passed last year, would they address the key environmental justice issues if they were really followed?
If they were really followed, I think it would help. It would give us space for that conversation to take place. Right now, as it is, the Energy Facility Siting Board just says, well, we can only, they pick up their book and they say, this is the legislation, and it says we have to do this, this, and this, and nothing else. So that's all. And the legislation originally was written, as we also came to know, by lawyers who worked for the industry, and then submitted it. They worked with legislators who were on their side, basically, with the lobbyists, and got that legislation passed. So it was written with the interest of the industry at heart. And when you think of how our electrical systems are set up, they really are set up with the mindset of many years ago when we were concerned about getting utility companies to invest in transmission and distribution because we needed to get to parts of the nation that did not have electricity. We needed to get that out there. And now those incentives aren't necessarily the same anymore. It's the same way that there are still parts of downtown Boston or anywhere in Boston that are labeled blight. The fact that you could find a Monsanto contaminated site in Everett and it is worth enough for the casino to go in and clean it all up. There is no blight in downtown Boston because the property is worth too much. There's no sense in giving people incentives to invest in a property if they're already going to do that. So there are certain things in our laws and regulations that are out of date. So things like the climate bill are important because we're updating things to the priorities that we have today. And I think a lot of the priorities we have today are realizing redlining, other sorts of policies in the past that were inherently racist. We want to fix that. We want to do right by people. And we're starting to change those things in our laws. But you really got to keep an eye on them because people backslide and industries have every reason to not allow this to go forward.
How do we get in a GreenRoots kind of mailing list so that when something is happening or you need some voices or some lobbying, we can be part of the team?
You can check out our website, and I believe, as long as it hadn't changed since the last time I got on here, I'll just put it on here, that there should be a space on there to sign up for our mailing list. We do maybe about a mailing a week, so it's not an overload of spam. And we will have updates on some of the things that are going on, whether they could be actual more fun events or calls to action. Happily, I think a lot of our current campaigns, like the things that are listed on that What You Can Do slide, you will probably be hearing about that from lots of our other, like you said, you asked who are our allies. Well, you all are probably on some of the mailing lists of some of those allies, whether it's 350 or Sierra Club. These folks are all really great at helping us get the message out. But if you sign up directly, you'll get some of those, but you also get some of the fun stuff too. I think once we get our teaching kitchen up and running, I think there should be some good food occasions. The teaching kitchen will be right across an alleyway from our urban farm. So there might be opportunities to come out and help with a harvest and maybe have some good fresh food too.
Well, I think if we're gonna help with the harvest, we should help with the weeding. Anyway, thank you so much, and thanks participants for feeding questions to me. And I love the clarity in your candor, John. I appreciate it. We're looking forward to next Sunday. We're gonna have it's gonna be a kind of a youth group. And we're gonna have the Drawdown video, which would be a 14-minute Making It Happen. Our guest speakers are Emily Hitchcock, climate-minded horticulturalist, and Charlo Hitchcock, environmental educator. Both of these young activists will speak about their experience with the Sunrise Movement, and they'll give listeners ideas about how they can get involved in support of the youth climate movement. Since you're here today, you're registered and have the Zoom link. I hope you'll be here and bring a friend, colleague, or a member of your family. Encourage them to prepare by watching any of the 5 videos they have missed. And thank you, David. You've been brave, and you've gotten us through this. And it's not easy to rehearse distributing 40 people across a breakout room when you only have 2 or 3 people involved in a rehearsal. So we've learned a lot today, and it'll be reflected next week. And thanks for David's competence and good-naturedness, and thanks for your patience. Now we're going to have a quick music video, and if you have information or questions you want to answer, please put them in the chat, because we're going to keep going for another 15 minutes. So here's our music video. It's only 1 minute and 43 seconds.
Climate justice now, people gonna rise like water, turn this system round in the voice of my great-granddaughter. Climate justice now, people gonna rise like water, turn this system round in the voice of my great-granddaughter. Climate justice now, people gonna rise like water, turn this system round in the voice of my great-granddaughter. Climate justice now, people gonna rise like water, turn this system round, in the voice of my great-granddaughter. I guess you've heard of climate change, our critical situation. If we don't turn this system round, we face annihilation. When farming fails, food runs out, folk will get what it's all about. It's up to us to choose our fate. If we don't act now, it'll be too late. Climate justice now, people gonna rise like water. Turn this system round, in the voice of my great-granddaughter. Climate justice now, people gonna rise like water. Turn this system round, in the voice of my great-granddaughter. Mass extinction's underway with habitat degradation. Ecosystems under threat in every single nation. If we don't act, there'll be no more trees, no more fish swimming in the seas. Climate change and ecocide, it's up to us, we must decide. Climate justice now, people gonna rise like water. Turn this system round, in the voice of my great-granddaughter. Climate justice now, people gonna rise like water. Turn this system round, in the voice of my great-granddaughter. Rising up to save our lives and future generations. Rising up against ecocide in each and every nation. Rising up without blame or shame for truth, action and system change. Now's the time to choose our fate. If we don't act now, it'll be too late. Climate justice now, people gonna rise like water. Turn this system round, in the voice of my great-granddaughter. Climate justice now, people gonna rise like water. Turn this system round, in the voice of my great-granddaughter. Climate justice now, people gonna rise like water. Turn this system round, in the voice of my great-granddaughter. Climate justice now, people gonna rise like water. Turn this system round, in the voice of my great-granddaughter. Climate justice now, people gonna rise like water. Turn this system round, in the voice of my great-granddaughter. Climate justice now, people gonna rise like water. Turn this system round, in the voice of my great-granddaughter. Climate justice now, people gonna rise like water. Turn this system round, in the voice of my great-granddaughter.
Climate justice now.
So we're opening the chat up, and also if you want to say something, raise your hand. Actually, and we'll unmute you. For sure. You can raise it electronically or physically, and Gail.
Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to say, I want to thank John Walkey. It was just a fabulous talk. I mean, I've heard all this stuff about there's more polluting in the neighborhoods like Chelsea. But seeing the pictures was very, very powerful, and it was so great, and you were so clear. So I can't thank you enough. I really feel like it was transformative for me.
Same here. Anyone else want to say something that's on their mind? Or ask a question? Well, if not, the recording, thanks to Gail, will be showing up on soon, and you'll be able to get to it from the link on Eventbrite. And next week, we're gonna have, it'll be a little different. We have we may have a music video or more within this, within the unit, not just before or after, because that's part of the energizing force when it comes to the youth movements. They're out there, and it makes a big difference. So we'll probably include some of that. So I will say goodbye and thank you, Dave, and we'll be making little improvements. Thank you.